Hello and welcome to our event today. My name is Joyce Garzinski. I'm the Assistant University Librarian for Development and Communications at Albert S. Cook Library. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we begin, I want to make sure that everyone knows what's going to happen today and what the format of our event is going to be. So I ask that you please make sure that your microphone is muted. And the format of today's event will be Dr. Guha will present about her book. Then I will ask her a few questions. And then all of you will have the opportunity to also ask your questions. So please, if you have a question, type it into the chat box or feel free to say that you have a question, and then we'll go through the list and I'll call on you. I want to remind you that you can purchase a discounted copy of this book from Rutgers University Press with the discount code RFLR19. And at the end of today's session, I'll put the link where you can directly go to purchase the book. So now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. And Dr. Pallavi Guha is an assistant professor of mass communication here at Towson University. She teaches journalism and new media courses and researches anti-rape and sexual harassment activism, the role of gender in campaign media, as well as politics and social media. Dr. Guha is a former journalist, researcher, and media educator with over a decade of experience. She also has a PhD in journalism from the University of Maryland. And I really want to add that she is a wonderful professional collaborator, and it's been truly a joy to work with her on both teaching and scholarship since she's arrived at Towson. So today, Dr. Guha is going to talk about her brand new book, Here, #MeToo in India, News, Social Media, and Anti-Rape and Sexual Harassment Activism. It was published by Rutgers University Press, and it's hot off the press. It just came out today. So without further ado, Dr. Guha, if you'd like to take it away.
Thank you so much. So good evening to everyone in the Northern American time zone, and good afternoon to everyone in the Northern American time zone, and evening to everyone joining in from GMT plus time zones, and there are several of you. So I want to start by acknowledging and thanking a few people who are around, and I promise it's just going to take a couple of minutes. So it's one of the lessons my parents instilled in me, that is to acknowledge and thank everyone who have always been there with me through thick and thin. And that includes many of you, most of you rather. So I want to acknowledge and thank my parents, daughter, my husband. None of them are here today, but when they see the recording, they'll be really happy. Joyce and Cook Library, thank you so much for organizing this book talk and helping me share my journey of writing this book. Rutgers University Press, thank you for making the book happen. My mentors and advisors who are here, Dr. Gajala, Dr. Steiner, and Dr. Chadha, who encouraged me all the way to write this book, not just during the dissertation, but even when I was writing it. And I appreciate and I'm thankful for the kindness and encouragement shown by institutional leadership, Provost Perold, Dean Carlo and Dean Dalglish from my alma mater, who carved out 30 minutes from their very busy schedule to attend my book talk. And I have several families to thank: my department chair, Dr. Lee, and most of my department colleagues who are here today and who have been supporting me since I came here in 2018, my other TU colleagues, my professors and mentors from grad school and undergrad institution, Dr. Muller, Dr. Pavlik, Dr. Bhattacharya, Dr. Chatterjee, thank you again for attending from various time zones. My Salzburg family, so many of you are here: Steve, Chad, Roman, thank you for attending. My SACA colleagues, Dave, Rolf, Lamia, Jordan, And last, but my alma mater family, I saw April, Sandy, and Allison, I think, yes. And my dear friends who have been the pillar of support, Rob, Amy, Paro, and my best friend BFF, for always being there. And everyone else who's attending this talk today, thank you for sharing your valuable time with me. So I was able to finish in 2 minutes. Now, without taking any further time, let's start with what is my book about. So in a nutshell, in my book, I focus on how anti-sexual violence public agenda is built on social and news media platforms in digital emerging spaces such as India. So I focus on sexual violence, I focus on activism, news, social media platform, and hashtag #MeToo and hashtag #MeTooIndia. Now, hashtag #MeToo is a global movement, and it happened all across the world. And in India, it happened first in 2017 and then in 2018 as hashtag #MeTooIndia. But the prolific rise of the movement did not sustain. I mean, initially it started off great, but it did not sustain for long, and neither did it reach to all communities, especially the rural communities. And in this context, one of my interview participants, Shrutopa, she's an anti-rape rural feminist activist, and we spoke in Bengali, and she shared a very insightful comment about hashtag #MeToo and hashtag #MeTooIndia. And she said that what you read, what makes news, and for her, even what we read and what we come across on social media sites is also news. So she says, "Khobor, what makes news is just the tip of the iceberg. How are you going to take into account all of them that are happening everywhere, especially in the rural communities?" And I really had nothing to say. Every time she says something, we had these conversations, and I'm just listening to her comments. And it was just one instance. I found while interviewing others that even in the hashtag activism era of Me Too and #MeTooIndia, the rural and urban feminist activists, as well as journalists, they experienced as well as they saw the impact of the movement very differently. From not understanding the movement to assessing the impact, it was very diverse. And one of the conversations we kept having, while interviewing, was comparing hashtag Nirbhaya movement of 2012, which happened right after the rape and murder of Jyoti Singh, also known as the infamous Delhi gang rape, and hashtag #MeTooIndia. So hashtag Nirbhaya is known as the watershed moment in anti-rape and sexual harassment activism in India. And it led to public agenda building narrative. It led to some policy changes. But 6 years later, when hashtag #MeTooIndia happened, it did not involve any policy or any agenda building changes as well. Yes, there was a government committee which was set up to investigate in 2018, but it was dissolved very quickly in 2019 without any recommendations or without any announcements even. It just goes on to show how it was not integrated in any kind of public agenda building or any kind of policy making as well. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, that was the crust of the book, and I want to talk a little bit about why I decided to write this book. So engaging in research and writing of sexual violence and activism, it has been sort of a catharsis for me. And it began in 2015 when I started working on the dissertation. And it continued until 2019 when I transitioned working on this book. And in this book, you are going to read not just the interviews, but I've also made a couple of personal narratives, personal connections to reach out to not just to the academic community, but also the non-academic community as well. And since 2012, after the infamous Delhi gang rape of Jyoti Singh, I've always wondered, and I've always wanted to analyze what makes hashtag Nirbhaya build a public agenda, political policies, and what neglects others such as Jisha, Sanjali, and several others who I also mention in my book. So cut to 2017, just I think a week or 2 weeks before I submitted my dissertation to my committee, hashtag #MeToo happened. So I did not get an opportunity to analyze or to include hashtag #MeToo in any data collection or analysis. I did include just minor details in the introduction and in the conclusion, just as a point of reference. I did want to see, and I did want to analyze from the lens of hashtag #MeToo how things were changing in the Indian spheres, digital spheres specifically, such as were there any changes in how activism was done? How were the rural feminist activists seeing them? How were they understanding? So I wanted my research to evolve further, right? So between defending my dissertation and joining TU, I submitted a book proposal to Rutgers University Press, which was eventually accepted after incorporating peer revisions. And in August of 2018, again, I renewed my journey of gathering more data, looking at news and coverage of rapes and sexual harassment and activism related to it from the lens of hashtag #MeToo. I had just started doing that in August of 2018. And then in September 2018, hashtag #MeToo India happened. So it is also known as the second phase or the second wave. So I just left everything, literally. I was in the midst of doing this. I left everything. And I scrambled to get more interviews with the activists and the journalists who were involved in it. It was then through these interviews that I was able to understand and also analyze so many other issues that were overlooked during the hashtag #MeToo India movement. And every time I would think about stopping either interviews or stopping looking at news coverage and just focus on analyzing, another heinous sexual assault would happen, and another sexual violence and another rape would happen. So finally, in July of 2019, I just had to stop. I had to stop collecting data. I had to stop analyzing. I couldn't keep up. Otherwise, I would not be able to complete this book. So during this time, I found both rural journalists as well as feminist activists. They did recognize the power of social media. They acknowledged it. But at the same time, they did not neglect the mainstream news media. It's also because India is one of the few countries where newspaper circulation is still growing. In fact, in 2019, it was growing by about 4.4%. And news channels are also, their viewership is also growing. So they never neglected, especially the rural activists and journalists, never neglected the mainstream news media. And one of my interview participants, who happens to be a rural and semi-rural journalist covering in West Bengal, Debomoy, he perfectly put it in one phrase. He said, "It is the power of being Facebookish that you see some difference in the media narrative and coverage regarding rape and sexual harassment in India." So I asked him to illustrate. I asked him, what does it mean? And he said, well, in 2005, an editor, if a rape and or a sexual harassment, if it happened in rural or semi-rural areas, if it was a busy news day, then an editor would carry the news a day after, 2 days after, or depending, they may well carry a week later or may not carry at all. But compared to that, in 2018, 2019, they were more likely to include that news, whether it went on page 1 or it went on page 5. It really depended on the news cycle, like how busy they were. And that's the reason he said that you see that there has been an increase in the number of coverage. So quantitatively, it has increased. So yes, social media has created a parallel space for news, even in semi-rural areas. And that's been one of the reasons of this increase. But other journalists and feminist activists, they also pointed out there has been an increase, there's no doubt, but the depth has not increased. So there are several contexts that's missing. It is not reported in depth. It's not followed up. So there are still issues. So the hashtag #MeTooIndia movement did make ripples in news as well as in social media, but it did not rock everywhere. It did not reach everywhere. And one of my other participants, a rural feminist activist, she puts it perfectly. She said that, yes, there is awareness regarding hashtag #MeToo, hashtag #MeTooIndia, what is happening in rural and semi-rural communities, and especially in young women and girls. There is awareness, they know, but there is no impact of that hashtag. So I asked her to elaborate, what do you mean by there is awareness, but there is no impact? Isn't the awareness impact? So she said, no, they know what's happening, but they cannot share their own experiences of sexual harassment. And I'm just going to take a brief minute to explain what that means. So they have access to social media platforms, they have access to smartphones, they are seeing how others are sharing their experiences, but they can't share their experiences of sexual harassment. Why? Because if they shared, then the reaction from the community and their family of providing safe space to them would mean limiting access to public spaces. So some of these girls or young girls or women, they would be sexually harassed if, when they in public spaces, when they would return from their schools or from work. So she said one of the ways the family or the community reacts is asking them to be homeschooled. So if you're not using that public space, then there is less chance of you getting sexually harassed. So you can stay home and continue, or you don't have to work outside, you can get married, right? Or you can do open education, like, get a degree from home instead of having access to those public spaces. So that dissuades them from sharing their stories, their experiences on social media platforms. And this perfectly illustrated to me the importance of location. And I talk about intersectionality of class, yes, caste, religion, and a lot about location, quite a bit, to the point of almost sometimes sounding like a realtor. But I do want to point out the hierarchy and gatekeeping that exists not just between the global north and the global south when it comes to covering rape and sexual harassment, but also activism related to rape and sexual harassment. But there is also hierarchy and gatekeeping within the global south. And I want to illustrate what it means having a hierarchy and gatekeeping within the global south. I want to talk about a rape survivor, a young woman from Unnao, UP. She was raped by a state legislative member of the ruling party in 2017. But there was limited coverage or limited activism for her until there was an attempt on her life in 2019. And when hashtag #MeTooIndia in 2018 was at its peak, she was interviewed by a rural journalist about the movement and about seeking justice for herself through the movement. So she was asked these questions, and this is what she said, and I quote, she said, "I don't have a phone, I don't watch TV, so I have no idea what is going on. I tried to seek justice, but I lost my father." So this lack of digital access not only makes rural and marginalized women vulnerable to rape and sexual assault, but when no one speaks for them, it also supports the system in harassing them. because, as I said, they cannot share everything online. And then there is Sanjali, a 16-year-old girl who was raped and murdered, burned alive in December of 2018 in a village, Malpura, exactly 6 years after Jyoti Singh was raped and murdered, and in the same year of #MeTooIndia. So Sanjali's rape and murder received very limited newspaper coverage in the two highest circulated English newspapers in India. The Hindi newspapers did a tad bit better, and they covered comparatively more. But there were no candlelight marches. There were no celebrities tweeting any #justice for her. There only a couple of, I would say, local activists. They tried to garner support by posting on Facebook #justice for Sanjali, but that is it. I mean, and after 2 weeks or so, there was no conversation around her rape and murder as well. So there are several others that I have also included in my book. And through this book, I've also tried to include what I could possibly offer, not just the academic community, but also the non-academic community, of not just focusing on social media platforms, but how both social and news media platforms, they kind of operate in tandem with each other, right? So based on these findings and analysis, yet again, I offer this concept of interdependent agenda building, which emphasizes on the interdependent association between social media networks and mainstream mass media, having the ability to build a public agenda in digitally emerging spaces, right? So India is one of the most diverse countries in the world. So how does social media and news media react to activism around rape and sexual assault? It is significant. So there is no doubt that social media empowers the victims and the survivors to know about others and to share their experiences. But it is important to acknowledge that it puts them in precarious positions, right? It puts the onus on them because not everyone is able to share their views on social media platforms or their harassment on social media platforms, because they could be living in closer proximity to their abusers. They may not have access, they might have community pressure, and so on. And this is where journalists and newsrooms come in to investigate and share news of rape and sexual violence. Because survivors and activists from rural India, they still consider journalists and news media as platforms of justice. And I say that because when a small news portal interviewed the mother of the rape survivors I was just referring to from Unnao in 2019, she said that only the media can give us justice. But 6 months ago, the media was nowhere to be seen. If you desert us, then who will give justice to us? Who will tell our story? She's not even depending on social media platforms. So there are many survivors and many victims of sexual violence who get left behind by both news media and social media platforms, especially in rural and semi-rural areas. And it just brings back to the point where, to what Shutopa said. And I want to conclude with an excerpt that I used in my book as well, which illustrates the point so much well. And this excerpt is from the autobiography of celebrated Indian feminist writer, Amrita Pritam, and I'm just going to read out the excerpt. My story is the story of women in every country, and many more in number are those stories which are not written on paper, but are written on the bodies and minds of women. So that was about it, and I hope this talk gave you an overview of what to expect in my book. And thank you for patiently listening in, and I am now ready for questions.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. Very well done. Thank you for sharing your research. I do have a few questions for you. First off, what about this idea of slacktivism, right? A lot of times activists get criticized because on social media, it's just a hashtag, it's just a tweet. What difference does that make? And so a lot of times they're ridiculed by being called slacktivists. How would you respond to that criticism?
Great question, Joyce. Thank you so much. So I would say that social media amplifies, I agree, it amplifies any activism, but it's also important to acknowledge that it does leave behind many, right? Due to access, due to digital divide. So slacktivism, I think it's because social media works in waves, and there are people who would rather share than do anything on the ground. So it's important to keep talking about slacktivism so that people are aware. Yes, there is there is this concept, and I should not be an armchair slacktivist just tweeting, but I should be, I should be doing more on this issue. So I think it's a very valid criticism, and it's a good criticism because it makes people aware if they are slacktivists or if they are doing something. So it's kind of jarring people, jarring slacktivists, and telling them that, okay, don't be a slacktivist, be an activist.
Absolutely. Great response. My next question is, how much of your research do you think is applicable to the United States? And what can American activists and journalists learn from what's taken place in India?
Right. Again, a very important question, and thank you. I would say that so a lot of my work is based on like digital divide, access to digital spaces as well, right? So in US, I was looking up some data. Only there is a difference of like 10% of the population, they don't have access to, digital spaces or there's digital divide. And in India, the number is 50%. So in that context, it's not that comparable. But what I can say based on other data, that Pew did a research in 2020 where most respondents agree that yes, social media helps in building the movement, but it works as a distraction. So I would say even in the US, looking at the role of journalists, that to sustain any movement, you would need journalists. Even when activists are sharing links, they always share valid and verified news links. So focusing on the role of journalists, not because I am biased and I was one, but I think I think not completely neglecting journalism, news media when we are talking about activism. So the role of mainstream news media, that is something activists across the world, especially in digitally emerging countries, that is something they need to acknowledge.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And my last question is, and I have to ask this question being a librarian talking about about the role of information here. As social media platforms evolve and change, it becomes more difficult to know what information to trust and to follow. How do you see activism evolving as the number of voices and perspectives and platforms grows?
So I want to say that activism, social media was a more organic platform before, and now it is used more strategically for the evolution of activism. And so activism evolving helps in the number of growing voices and perspectives, yes, but acknowledging those voices and perspectives, that is going to be helpful for the old guards, like I say. So even in my book, I demonstrate, and that example would be of LOSHA, a list of Indian and Indian origin academics. It was started by Raya Sarkar. She's a transnational digital feminist, and she started this list, but she received a lot of backlash from older feminists, Indian feminists, right? So not acknowledging the fact that the number of voices are growing and the perspectives are changing, it will only create silos, right? So doing that and always making sure that we follow trustworthy news and trustworthy information, we share trustworthy information so that we are not caught in an echo chamber as well, right? So acknowledging and helping those perspectives to grow. That is something I think we should focus a little bit on.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So the first comment and question that we have is thank you, Pallavi, for a very interesting presentation. People in India still view the Me Too movement as an urban one. Although you have talked about rural feedbacks, would you believe that it was predominantly an urban movement?
Yes, thank you for the question. And that's what most of my participants, they acknowledged as well. The reason why it did reach urban, rural, feminist activists, they were aware, but they were not participating as much because it was viewed as a more urban-centric movement, and that it was not taking along everyone. It was not by design, but it was just by it's just the way it happened, because most of it took place and happened on Twitter and Facebook. And again, it's access related. Not everyone has access, and not everyone is willing to share openly what they're going through. So all of those made this this perception of #MeToo being mostly an urban movement. That made the perception.
Great, thank you. We have lots of questions lined up,
Right.
which is great. Rauf, if you would unmute and ask your question.
Thank you so much, Joyce and Pallavi and everyone, for this wonderful discussion, and particularly very enlightening questions. Pallavi, I want to know a little bit more, like, what's your perspective about the sustainability aspect of these #MeToo kind of social movements? Because there are so many social movements we see, they pop up on social media platforms and then they subside so quickly. And you actually pointed out to that fact. This is one thing, like, what can be done to make them a little bit more sustainable, in your opinion, after conducting this amazing research? And the second part of my question would be about the informational cascades, whether such urban social movements would contribute somehow to create those kind of informational cascades that Susan Lohmann, basically, she pointed out to Leipzig movement in Germany in 1960s, I believe. And then, like, how those informational cascades eventually contributed to a bigger social movement. Do you think it's gonna ever happen in societies like Pakistan, India, or Bangladesh? Because we kind of like share similar kind of cultures.
Thank you so much, Ralph, for your questions. Very insightful questions. So let me start with the first one. And so the thing that I understood after interviewing so many people is you have to be inclusive of grassroots level activists. A lot of times they do the legwork and they do real activism in the grassroots level, but no one knows them, or no one can connect with them unless they have their direct contact, because they are not on social media platforms, a lot of them, right? So, and that creates those silos. And sometimes what happens when you are trying to sustain these movements across, like, not just in one community, not just in one location, but across the location, you need the help of activists who not just work on social media platforms, who are not just very tech savvy, but who know the community very well, right? And one of the things, one of my rural feminist activists I interviewed, she said that, we have several women, young women and girls who picket, who go and who do activism at the grassroots level. They forego their lunch and their work for a day, because they want to make sure that if someone has been sexually harassed, then they receive justice. So they will go and sit there, like dharna means, sit in protests. They will do it. But unless the mass media covers it, no one comes to know. So they kind of, that's, so the sustaining any kind of movement that happens in the urban areas, to sustain them and to take it to other parts of the country. And I think you are right in pointing out, culturally and even community-wise, India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh, we share like similar traits. So anything that happens in urban areas and you want them to reach to the rural areas, you need to be inclusive of the grassroots level feminist activists. And there is a lot of hierarchy. In fact, one of them said that, they are not always welcome to participate in some of the things in urban activism. So not leaving them behind, but being inclusive. Unless we are inclusive and we acknowledge that, then we cannot sustain any kind of activism.
Thank you so much, Pallavi. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Our next question comes from Rob Wells.
Great. Congratulations, Dr. Guha.
Oh,
Fantastic
you,
book. I just really admired the warmth and the humanity in the introduction, and it was to have your personal feelings in this, I thought was just a really important evolution. It was really, really neat to see. What I wanted to ask was a little bit broader about, your research seems to suggest that the mainstream media plays this, and the legacy media plays a central role in digital activism. And I kind of wanted to explore that a little bit more. So as I understand it, the activists just don't have the platform on their own. They really need to have some sort of alliance or buy-in from the legacy media. Do I have that right? And how do the journalists feel about being used or part of this movement? How long do they go along with it? And do they tire of it eventually? So that's basically, I'm just trying to explore that relationship between the legacy media folks, their reactions to this phenomenon of digital activism.
Thank you for the question, Rob. And I want to say this, that there is reliance, on journalists, especially when we talk about rural feminist activists. They rely more as compared to, I would say, urban feminist activists. And why do I say that? Because they have a lot of access to resources, to technology. But the rural feminist activists, they, in terms of contacting, or in terms of knowing information or even help, they reach out to the journalists. And they have the journalists in semi-rural and rural areas, and the feminist activists, they share a good relationship, between each other. And when I was at least interviewing them, the journalists as well, they did not share they were either being tired or they felt like they were being used, but they were only happy to collaborate. I use the word collaborate because a lot of times they said, oh, we also get to know what is happening in the communities from them. So that's important for us as well. But in the urban, I would say in the urban areas, the relationship is a bit different. It's a bit different between activists and journalists. Also because they have access to a lot of other resources to reach, the activists to reach out, or to propagate, to spread awareness, and so on. So because they have more resources at their disposal, they are able to do this, I would rather say, without much help from journalists, or without even taking them into account.
Great, thank you very much.
It looks like Sahar Kami from the University of Maryland has a question.
Hi, Sahar.
I have to remember to unmute myself first. Thank you so much, and many congratulations to you, Pallavi. This is excellent. I'm so proud of you and proud of the great work. I was on Pallavi's PhD committee at the University of Maryland, so I cannot tell you how proud I am to see this excellent project coming together and also becoming a University Press book. This is amazing. My question really was a follow-up point about the double-edged sword effect of digital activism or cyber activism, especially now in the days of the coronavirus pandemic. As we all know, there are so many opportunities for women, but there are also so many challenges in terms of their access and the usability of different digital platforms. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about the pros and cons. I know that you touched upon this in your own presentation in the context of your own research and how denial of access or lack of access to technology and digital platforms can hinder or inhibit women in terms of asking for their rights and so on. But in the context now of the current a coronavirus pandemic, how do you see this line of research and inquiry moving forward, and whether this will have some kind of impact on your own research also moving forward? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sahar. So glad you could join me
Thank
and
you.
everyone else. Yeah. So talking about the pandemic and how it may impact. So I just, after the book got released, I was able to connect with a couple of my participants online. And I was just, having general chats with them, like, how things are, and, this is coming out. So what is happening in the rural communities and others and so on. So one of the things that I heard from at least two people, and I don't know if it answers your question, but they said that you are not reading about it and you possibly don't know, but since the pandemic, there has been a tremendous increase in sexual violence and human trafficking, especially in the rural areas, because of not just because of financial reasons, but other than economic reasons, these girls are being discriminated against and they're abused because some of them are home and some of them are being traded and so on. And one of them asked me, are you reading about it? And I said, no, I haven't read anything about it. And then another person, they asked me, so have you read anything online on social media platforms? I said, no, I haven't come across anything. So I just wanted to bring this up to, I don't know if it answers your question, that so much goes under, I would say under the cover, like we don't even come to know, whether we are, through online or through news, and especially in the current context when the pandemic is raging. And I just had these conversations, I would say, in the past month or so. And for me personally, not just as a researcher, but also as someone who has been keeping in touch with my participants, it was an eye-opening sort of a thing, because even I am online, I read up quite often. So these are things that I'm not aware of. So, there must be so much that we don't know that is happening when we talk about sexual violence and sexual assault, even though we are omnipresent, almost 24/7 all the time online. But there's so much information that that skips us, that we are just not aware of it. So I think this will in some way or the other impact my research, because I want to investigate further. I want to know what is happening after the pandemic, when we are spending so much time online, but at the same time, we are missing all of this information.
Absolutely. This can be your next book, hopefully.
Hopefully.
And congratulations again. Great job. So proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So our next question comes from John. That was a fascinating and such important work. Could you tell us a bit more about how you work as an engaged public scholar on this vital topic?
Thank you so much, John, for your question. So I like to use the word public scholar And it helps me in engaging with the participants a lot more, because I just don't, I see them as collaborators. It's not just me who is asking them questions, but they also ask me questions. So I see this as an interaction whenever I'm interviewing or I'm having a chat with them. And from the point of view of being a public scholar, it's not, when I was writing this book, I tried to make it, like I said, a little more non-academic as well. I mean, sharing my personal narrative, sharing my personal experiences as well, so that I just don't talk about it from an academic point of view, but also something that others would be interested in knowing, people who are in the non-academic community, right? So not just presenting at conferences or writing for journals, but also letting others know. And one of the things I want to do, and I have tried to do, is writing for newspapers still now. Just, kind of briefly presenting my research to the broader community, to the public, to the citizens, and getting feedback. So that keeps me engaged as well as a public scholar and also as a collaborator.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Shanjatka. How do you think that the movement, or why do you think that the movement kind of fizzled out in India in a very short while?
Thank you so much for your question, Dr. Bhattacharya. So that I've written this in detail. So I'm just hoping to summarize the point and share some of the allegations against the movement after doing the interviews. It was not just very urban specific, but at the same time, it left out women, survivors, rape survivors, as well as victims who belonged to lower classes, lower castes, and other religions. So it was not very inclusive. So several did not see this women as this movement as being as diverse and as inclusive. And so they refrained from participating in the movement, right? So again, I wouldn't say it is by design, but this is how it happened. And there were some conversations when I was speaking with journalists and other feminist activists. They said that most of the survivors who are sharing their narrative and sharing their stories, they belong to a certain class and certain location. We go through this so much more often, but nobody tells us our stories. #MeTooIndia never happened. I mean, no one was telling our stories. Even now, you will not hear a lot about what is happening, what women are facing in the paddy fields, or what women are facing in the villages, or what Dalit women are facing. So being inclusive, I think that is what was missing in the entire narrative, and that was one of the reasons why it kind of did not sustain for long.
Thank you, Pallavi. In fact, I asked you this question because one gets the feeling, even I wrote something on Me Too, and that was because I was asked to, but this was about, our mythology and how, I don't know, you may have read it in one of these. But what I'm saying is that, the real stories would not really present it. As you said, it was just a small class thing, right? I mean, this was mainly women from the colleges and the universities, and it's a kind of a fad writing about experiences felt or not really felt, but the real ones, did they speak out? That's probably one of the reasons that it did not. They lost interest, this group, after they'd written about, few stories, and that's it. But the real stories, involving, especially, as you said, the lower classes, the scheduled castes, the tribal women, or for the matter, the lower middle class or the slum women who really do not use, you see, this kind of thing. They put their photographs up, but they do not know how to express themselves too well, and they do not write. Their stories never got told. Would you agree with me?
Right, yes. And that is what several others, like the participants, also pointed out.
Okay.
The same thing, yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Congratulations, and keep writing.
Thank you.
Very proud of you.
Our next question comes from Linda. Linda, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, and again, I'm so proud of you also, Pallavi. So I was thinking about this question when you were talking about slacktivism and information, and I just want to put this, and it's going to be a little provocative, I guess, but my question is this really about information? I mean, if what the feminist activists want to achieve is lowering the number of sexual assaults and lessening the problem of sexual harassment, is more information and more even awareness really the route to accomplishing that?
Thank you for your question, Linda. And let me answer this in two parts. So the first one, I think it's information is going to help others know and be involved. Like the more information everyone is aware of, like this is happening in rural areas, semi-rural, in urban areas, it will help spread the awareness. And that several feminist activists said that, passing the information along is important because it is going to help others know and get engaged. And at the same time, there were others who did not want to be on social media platforms. So I just want to tell about one of the rural feminist activists. I asked her, you do such fabulous work. She pickets, she also teaches self-defense to younger women, so that they can protect themselves against rape and sexual harassment. I asked her, why aren't you on social media platforms? What is stopping you? I mean, you can just be there. She said, yeah, I know, but it's just going to take the time away from being on social media like if I'm on social media platforms, I have to be on social media platforms and be engaged with others. So it is going to take the time away. So I would rather focus here. And I have WhatsApp, so I can get in touch with others. If I have to spread information, I can use that. So there are two ways to look at it. I think some feminist activists, they want to be on social media platforms to amplify and to spread the information. And like I said, I used her example. I asked her, why aren't you on social media platforms? She said that I would rather spend the time here, doing classes and focus on the grassroots level activism. So I don't know if I answered that correctly or if I was able to answer it.
So we have time for one last question. And as we are leaving, there are still many other questions. Pallavi, would you be open to attendees, if they had additional questions after the session, to contact you directly?
Sure, definitely.
Okay. And I will also put in the chat box the link for purchasing the book, so look for that. Our last question looks at slacktivism again. Would you say that slacktivism is a fair critique? For many people, regardless of geography, they have not had the opportunity to give their voice before. So for them, sharing a hashtag is a big effort because of cultural patriarchy and general risk. How would you respond to that?
So let me put it this way. I am not critiquing slacktivism completely, as in, if you are only sharing hashtags but not putting it into practice, then I'm critiquing as a scholar. But there are other, say, for instance, if someone is sharing hashtag #MeToo but not supporting the ground level feminist activists who are doing a lot of work in the grassroots level, then yes, I am calling for a critique. And why do I say that? It comes from one of the conversations I had. Again, I keep referring back to these amazing conversations that I've had. In an interview, one of the rural feminist activists, she said that, I do a lot of work. And then, she knows someone who stays in an urban area and has a nonprofit. She said he comes and he takes pictures of what we are doing here, and he uses #MeToo and #MeTooIndia, and he claims the work as his own, as if he's doing it, right? So she is not on social media sites. And I told her, so why didn't you say anything to him or others? She said, I don't have the time to indulge in it, right? So this is a great example of, there are, of course, people who are going to use the hashtags, who are going to co-opt the hashtags rather for slacktivism, but not do anything on the ground or not support the grassroots workers and grassroots activists who are bearing the burden and who are taking the movement forward. So that's what I am critiquing, essentially.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pallavi Guha. Thank you so much for your presentation today and for your, more importantly, for your research on this very, very important topic. Thank you to all of you for attending today. There will be, I have been recording this, and so when the recording is live, I will send you the email with the recording. So thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for attending and asking those insightful questions and intriguing questions. I hope I was able to answer them. And I hope you enjoy reading the book as much as I worked hard writing it.
Thanks, Pallavi. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Pallavi.
Thank you. Thank you for attending.
It was so good to see you.
Yeah, it was great to see you, Tim. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, I enjoyed it very much. Thank you.
Good to see you, Tim.
See you too, Joyce. Invite me anytime.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you, Pallavi.
Thank you so much, Joyce. It was wonderful. I hope I was able to answer the questions.
You did a wonderful job.
Thank you. Thank you again. And I'll be looking forward